beautiful showing for life. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here. I love the state of Wisconsin. I love this group, and it's wonderful to see y'all. Today is a day of celebration for the pro-life movement. Finally, at long last, it feels like the pro-life movement's goals are within sight. The abolition of the killing of the unborn. In Georgia, a heartbeat bill has been signed into law that enshrines the right of unborn human life beyond the 6th week of pregnancy. In Alabama, a bill has been signed into law that protects the unborn person at the very earliest stages of life from conception. Louisiana and Missouri will soon pass their own heartbeat bills, just as Ohio, Kentucky, North Dakota, and Mississippi already have. The pro-life cause is on the march. So naturally, it's no surprise, the lies have begun. The lie that these bills do not protect women who have abortions from prosecution, an outright lie repeated everywhere from CNN to, of course, the BBC. The lie that these bills are intended to control women's bodies when they are intended to protect the bodies of our precious unborn. The lie that women everywhere are against these bills. Ladies, please raise your hands and show the media how women feel about the pro-life cause. If you are pro-life and you are a woman, please raise your hand. Just a few women in the crowd. The media will not stop telling these lies. That's because the media and Democrats do have a deep stake in pro-abortion lies. They have a stake in euphemisms, in inconsistent logic, in name-calling. This is their thing. They have a stake in the preservation of Roe versus Wade, one of the two worst decisions in the history of the Supreme Court, alongside the Dred Scott decision. Both cases declared that people were not people. Only one has been overturned, and it took a civil war and 600,000 dead to do it. But we are overturning Roe with the power of changing hearts. The polls are indeed shifting in our favor, and so are the winds. And this isn't based on religious concern. You know, Chris Cuomo, the even dumber of the Cuomo brothers, which is saying a lot. Chris Cuomo of CNN, he suggested that the pro-life movement is based on faith and feelings, but that is not why people are becoming pro-life. People are becoming pro-life because they see the science. Not because they went to church or synagogue, but because the science is clear. The baby's heartbeat begins at 18 days. It develops its own closed circulatory system at 21 days. By week 3 after conception, the baby's brain, spinal cord, heart, and other organs begin to form. This is when most women find out for the first time that they are pregnant, at the earliest. By week 4, we're looking at the earliest facial features already. By week 7, the baby has toes. By week 9, the baby has begun the development of external genitalia in accordance with sex. It turns out, by the way, you can tell the sex of a baby without asking its opinion. By week 10, the baby's fingernails have developed. People are seeing the reality of pregnancy. This is not a polyp. This is not a cluster of cells. This is a human life. And every woman who has ever had a baby, every woman who has ever had a miscarriage knows this. When my wife and I had a miscarriage at about 10 weeks in with our first child, we were not weeping because that was a cluster of cells. We were weeping because this was a human life. That is what a human life is. And to pretend that this is meaningless or nothing is so degrading, not only to human life, but to parents everywhere, and particularly to women. It's insulting and it's disgusting. The pro-abortion side may hide behind a vague word like personhood, forgetting that at root, what makes us all human beings is our unique human life, that biological human life and personhood are synonymous. Instead, they seek to draw arbitrary lines that distinguish some types of human life from other types of human life. And those are lies as well. Human life deserves protection at every single stage, and we will fight to protect it. Now, the debate will not end, even if the Supreme Court, God willing, strikes down Roe versus Wade. Pro-abortion fanatics are on the march as well. New York recently passed a bill that legalizes abortion up to the point of birth. Governor Andrew Cuomo, the other dumb Cuomo brother, declared that state buildings should be lit pink in honor of the killing of the unborn in a state so rife with abortion that every year more African American children are killed before birth than born in the largest city in New York. Virginia nearly passed a bill that would have done the same, with State Delegate Kathy Tran declaring a baby could be aborted with its head in the birth canal, which is the essence of savagery, barbarism, and dark age mentality. You don't see anyone in the media using that sort of language to describe that sort of action. Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey declared today that he would seek national legislation to re-enshrine Roe versus Wade. So the fight is going to continue, which means that I'm sure everyone in this room is already conversant with these arguments, but we're going to go through some of the most important counter-arguments to the pro-abortion movement tonight, because the argument does not stop even if Roe versus Wade is overruled. The first argument that we hear all too often is that abortion is a right. This hashtag actually trended today on Twitter, hashtag abortion is a right. The right to kill an unborn human being appears nowhere in the Constitution because, frankly, the founders would have been horrified by such a concept. It simply is not there. The Supreme Court first declared a right to privacy created by emanations and penumbras. Ooh. These emanations and penumbras emanated and penumbraed from the First, Third, Fourth, Fifth, and Ninth Amendments in Griswold versus Connecticut. They basically just threw out a bunch of amendments, not bothering to explain how the right to be free from the quartering of soldiers in your home is quite the same as a right to privacy that encompasses killing the unborn. Then, in Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court declared this right of privacy, whether it be founded in the 14th Amendment's concept of personal liberty and restrictions upon state action, as we feel it is, or in the 9th Amendment's reservation of rights to the people, it's broad enough to encompass a woman's decision whether or not to terminate her pregnancy. Now that is some serious constitutioning right there. To be able to just throw out, whether it's in the 14th, whether it's in the 9th, whether it's in the 3rd, whether it's in like the 21st, doesn't really matter. We feel it's there, therefore it is there. This is all absurd, it is made up. The 14th Amendment explicitly guarantees a right to life, as does the 5th Amendment. The 9th Amendment was designed to protect people's rights against federal government encroachment, not to increase federal power at the expense of the people. The same folks, politically, who declare a phantom right to privacy encompassing abortion also frequently deny that the Constitution includes a right to bear arms, a right to freedom of religion, or a right to freedom of political speech. These are the same folks who will say that there is a right to health care, but not a right to life for the unborn. This is a constitutional and philosophical absurdity. Rights are the things that we have by virtue of being human beings, by virtue of being alive. Rights are freedoms from being murdered, for example, freedom from being chopped apart in the womb. The first freedom is the freedom to life, not to be targeted for death. Roe versus Wade is an egregiously evil case, a case that suggests a right to remove the life of another. Justice Blackmun, who wrote the opinion in that case, he said, "We need not resolve the difficult question of when life begins. When those trained in the respective disciplines of medicine, philosophy, and theology are unable to arrive at any consensus, the judiciary, in this point in the development of man's knowledge, is not in a position to speculate as to the answer." Here's why that's evil. Leaving the definition of life to the whim of every individual is a recipe for the worst human rights abuses in history. Every human rights abuse begins with the dehumanization of another group of people you don't like, whether it is slavery, or whether it is the Holocaust, or whether it is the mass killing of the unborn. There is only one answer as to when life begins, at conception. That is the only biological answer. Every single biology textbook teaches you this. It's no wonder that even Lawrence Tribe, who's about as left as it's possible to be over at Harvard Law School, where I went, said of Roe that, quote, "Behind its own verbal smokescreen, the substantive judgment on which it rests is nowhere to be found." Okay, the second argument you hear all too often is that unborn human lives aren't persons. The argument here is that women are pregnant with something non-human. In fact, someone tweeted that last week, that you're pregnant with something that is non-human. What, a chicken? There is no evidence that this is the case. Every single biology textbook, as I referred to, informs us when life begins, at conception. If we found a single-celled organism on Mars today, the headline would read, "Life found on Mars." If we found a multicellular organism with its own DNA and blood type, there's no question we would categorize it as a life form. At conception, a unique being comes into being by every scientific measure. New life possesses human DNA. This is human life. Abortion was the wrong way, no matter how early it was performed. It was taking life. You know who wrote that line? Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. What about personhood? So, like the left's definition of gender, the term has no meaning for the left beyond the ability to arbitrarily define personhood the way they want to define it. And we say human life equals personhood. The left says personhood could be anything. It could be what's in your mind, in your heart, in your feelings. It could be brain activity. It could be a heartbeat. It could be sentience. It could be viability. Are human lives synonymous with personhood? No, that'd be too easy and simple to simply define personhood by biology. Instead, like gender, it's a malleable term that fits the circumstances as we see them. But here's the truth. All other standards, except for human life itself, collapse in on themselves when you define the term personhood. So take viability. That's the standard that's used in Roe versus Wade. Viability of the human fetus. Viability is a terrible standard for when personhood begins. Because the truth is that there are a lot of people who cannot survive on their own as adults. Most of them are members of my generation. But certainly, fully formed babies, right out of the womb, cannot survive on their own. They require somebody to take care of them. I have 2 kids, a 5-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. If I leave my 3-year-old son alone for more than 6 minutes at a time, he will find a way to kill himself. He is not a viable human being. If within a 3-mile radius there is a fork and an electric socket, he will find a way to unite these 2 things. Viability is a terrible standard for when personhood becomes a thing. Peter Singer, an ethicist at Princeton University, at least acknowledges this problem. He wrote in The Scotsman in 2009, quote, "Opponents will respond that abortion is by its very nature unsafe for the fetus. They point out that abortion kills a unique living human individual. That claim is difficult to deny, at least if by human we mean member of the species Homo sapiens." He provided a solution because he's on the left, Peter Singer. His solution was that human beings can be killed even after birth if they lack rationality, autonomy, and self-consciousness. He says killing a newborn human baby is never equivalent to killing a person. That is a being who wants to go on living. At least give it to Peter Singer. Like Ralph Northam, there's a logic to it. Naturally, this also means that you should be able to kill somebody hooked up to an iron lung because the person has no autonomy, somebody who's unconscious, that person has no self-consciousness, or somebody who's mentally ill because there's no rationality there. The truth is that even Singer's logic is self-defeating there because it assumes a binary definition of rationality, autonomy, and self-consciousness when we know there are gradations. And the third argument that is very frequently used by the pro-abortion movement is that it is responsible to abort, which seems rather self-serving. Actress Jamila Jamil of The Good Place, great show. She happens to be wrong and saying something pretty terrible here. Jamila Jamil tweeted this week, quote, "I had an abortion when I was young, and it was the best decision I have ever made." Like ever? Like of all your decisions? Like not even Rocky Road at Baskin Robbins that one time? Like the killing of the baby was that awesome? "I had an abortion when I was young, and it was the best decision I've ever made, both for me and for the baby I didn't want and wasn't ready for, emotionally, psychologically, and financially. So many children will end up in foster homes. So many lives ruined. So very cruel." Well, this is pretty evil. She acknowledges openly that she had her baby put to death. Why? Because she was not ready for it. You know who wasn't ready for parenthood? Parents. Really, as a parent, there's never been a parent who's like, you know what, I'm ready for parenthood, I got this thing under control. When we have the baby, everything, single thing is, like we all think that. And then we have kids like, oh boy, didn't see that one coming. This notion that you have to be emotionally, psychologically, and financially ready for a baby, for the baby to deserve life, is the most absurd, silly thing I have ever heard in my life. No parent is ever emotionally, psychologically, and financially ready for a baby, ever. And then you become a better person because you have children. What about the other people that we take care of, by the way? Are we allowed to off anyone we deem inconvenient? Right? Feminist Liz Plank seems to think so. Today, she tweeted, quote, "Behind millions of successful men is an abortion they don't regret getting with their partner." Now, I'm noticing how the feminists have shifted their language here. So you're supposed to not say that you and your wife are pregnant. But if she has an abortion, then you got the abortion together with her, right? So that we can now rope you into defense of the abortion. Behind millions of successful men is an abortion they don't regret getting with their partner. I urge men, she says, to go beyond solidarity and talk about how they personally benefited from abortion rights too. Not because it's the right thing to do, but because it's true. So good news. Gentlemen, if it advances your career, you can kill whomever you please. We are now living in the plot of American Psycho. It's pretty spectacular. Also, you hear the version of the argument that if you're not adopting somebody else's unaborted child, you have no say. I see this argument all the time, right? Well, you know, you guys aren't doing enough for the babies who are already born. We can all do more for babies who are already born. That's wonderful. I have a general principle, however, and that is I don't have to adopt everyone I don't want to see murdered. Like, there are lots of people out there who I would prefer not be killed, like namely pretty much everybody. And if the argument is that in order for me to say it's bad to kill them, I have to adopt them, I don't think that's a good argument. I don't think we should be able to kill everyone I am personally unwilling to adopt. I mean, I just can't afford that many dependents. I'm sorry. The fourth argument we hear all the time is that women should have the only say. We've been hearing this false argument for years. First off, I have to note, it is deeply weird and ironic that the left is declaring that only women should have a say. This is deeply cis-normative. I am incredibly insulted. This is unwoke. What about... I saw some tweets this week saying, no uterus, no opinion. And all I thought was, Caitlyn Jenner is a woman too. Now, before Caitlyn Jenner was a woman, then he couldn't have an opinion. But now that he is a woman, presumably he can speak as much as he wants on abortion issues. Right? That's the way this works. What constitutes a woman exactly, according to the left, such that you can have an opinion? So let's say you're, I don't know, the governor of Alabama who just signed an extraordinarily pro-life bill into law, and you also happen to be named Kay Ivey and you're a woman. Are you still a woman or not? Because according to the left, you're not really a woman unless you support their positions. How about like the majority of female voters in South Carolina, who outnumber male voters by hundreds of thousands of voters, and yet South Carolina is an incredibly pro-life state? Are they all not women? It's amazing to me that woman has been redefined from biologically a woman to people who agree with the left. That's an amazing thing. Also, I'm finding it kind of weird that all the people out there like, look at all these men in Georgia who voted for a pro-life law. Well, let's look at the constituency of the Supreme Court that decided Roe v. Wade. A lot of white dudes on that court. In fact, every vote in favor of Roe versus Wade was white dude. I don't seem to be hearing complaints about that. Now, the premise behind the question seems to be that because women bear the brunt of childbearing, they're the only people who get to talk about it. By this logic, only rich people who pay the tax burden should be able to talk about government expenditures. Only business owners should be able to set salaries free of the input of employees. After all, they're the ones paying the salary. And frankly, only men should be able to talk about child support. But there's something else here too. And it really goes to the heart of how so many people on the left view the role of women in our society. They're so dismissive of the most incredible thing in life about being a woman. Okay, the greatest thing about being a woman, speaking as a man, freely admitting this, but it seems to me like women have a superpower. They can generate an entire another human being out of their body and then preserve the life of that human being with their body. That is an incredible gift. I mean, to feel a human life going inside you, kicking you from the inside, I mean, like, I can't even imagine what an incredible gift that is. And to demean women's experience by saying, you know, that stuff is unimportant, but what you should really do is work 2,200 billable hours at a law firm. That's the thing that really makes you a powerful woman. Listen, I am fine with women working. Everyone knows my wife is a doctor. That means I spend more time at home than my wife does with my kids. And this has been true for the last 11 years, right? My kids are 5 and 3, but for the entire scope of our marriage, I have spent more time at home than my wife because she is a career woman. When I was growing up, my mom worked and my dad stayed at home with the kids. So not only do I have no problem with women in the workplace, I'm very much in favor of women doing whatever job they want to do. But to suggest that women do not have a special gift and a special stake in bearing children is absurd, and has created so much human unhappiness in our society when women have been lied to and told the greatest fulfillment that they can possibly find is not in having children, which is the greatest gift that any of us can have, male or female. But the greatest gift instead is something like you get to work at a job. It's called a job, by the way, right? It's not called a fun. You get to work at a job, and then you'll be rewarded every so often with a yoga class and rosé. Finally, women, it turns out, actually do have a say in the production of children, except in cases of rape and incest, which we'll get to in a second. We do have this thing called abstinence. We also have this thing called birth control. You know, it's kind of hilarious. If you don't want to have kids, you don't have to in the United States. Without aborting kids. It's incredible. Hilariously, this is the best thing this week. It was so good. Alyssa Milano, the platonic ideal of a philosopher, put down her Handmaid's Tale costume just long enough to tweet this, quote, Our reproductive rights are being erased. Until women have legal control over our own bodies, we just cannot risk pregnancy. Join me by not having sex until we get bodily autonomy back. I'm calling for a hashtag sex strike. Pass it on. Couple things. One, I am really glad I'm not married to Alyssa Milano. I mean, can you imagine being her husband and he's like, Alyssa, I'm just as pro-choice as you are. She's like, nope. Over in Georgia, there's a problem going on. Couch. Second of all, I'm really excited that the left has discovered traditional marriage. This is an exciting discovery. After several thousand years of this thing called marriage, where we basically restrict sex to the within marriage context, specifically so that we only have sex with people with whom we are willing to have children, and then if you accidentally get pregnant, it's not really a big deal, because hey, you're married to the person? Pretty awesome. I'm a fan. You know, it's hilarious that the left is finally, oh my God, you know, they're not gonna let us kill babies anymore. We might have to not have sex. Boom. Mind explosion. Okay, so, fifth argument that we are constantly hearing is that abortion should be allowed in cases of rape and incest. And you're seeing this even from some supposedly pro-life people or fully pro-life people, is that cases of rape and incest are the difficult cases, and those are the ones that we should sort of leave out when we have these discussions. Now, I want to start with a quick point. First off, this is never an honest argument by folks who are pro-choice, because they're not actually talking about cases of rape and incest. I've asked this question so many times in college campuses when I'm talking with people who are not college students on the left. If they bring up rape and incest, I say, okay, so let me just start with this. On all the other cases, do we agree that abortion should be forbidden? And they always say no. I said, so then why are we talking about the fringe case? Right? You're talking about the fringe case because you wish to use that as an emotional appeal and say, therefore, because this is a hard case, therefore we should make sure that all abortions are legal. Okay, you're not worried about the rape and incest cases, you're worried about all of these other cases. Right? Only a tiny percentage of abortion, and that is intellectually dishonest, because obviously only a tiny percentage of abortions spring from rape and incest. As early as 1987, the Alan Guttmacher Institute, which surveys this stuff, asked women about their reasons for abortion. Only 1% of the 1,900 women surveyed suggested rape. 95% of those who did mention rape or incest named other reasons aside from the rape or the incest as well for deciding to abort, including economic circumstances. Tamar Lewin reported at the time, in a separate 1979 analysis, when federally financed abortions were available in cases of rape or incest, or where the pregnancy threatened the woman's life or physical health, the Institute said that a total of 3,675 women had abortions paid for by federal money. The Institute said it knew which category qualified only about 2,400 of the women. Of those 2,400 women, only 72 were eligible because of rape or incest. PolitiFact says that in 2010, there may have been just 7,000 pregnancies from rape. And that doesn't say how many of those pregnancies resulted in abortion. Every year, there are about 1 million abortions in the United States. But as to morality, to get to the crux of the matter on rape and incest, the obvious answer to this is that one evil crime does not justify another crime. If you were raped, God forbid, that would not give you the right to turn to somebody else in the audience and kill them. The baby does not bear the moral responsibility for the rape or incest. Its life does not become any less valuable because of the circumstances of its conception. Rape and incest are deep evils. Those who perpetrate them should be castrated or killed. Okay, but that has nothing to do. That has nothing to do with the excuse to kill an unborn child. And I understand that it is, and let me just make this clear, it is deeply heroic for a woman who's been victimized that way to carry a child all the way to term. Nothing but sympathy. That is heroic action. The sixth argument we hear all the time is, it's my body. So this is the libertarian bodily autonomy argument. It goes something like this. Sure, an unborn baby is a human life, but suppose somebody knocked you out, and when you woke up, you were changed to another human being, and that human being was drawing blood and nutrients from your body. Wouldn't you then be entitled to cut the cord? This is the famous sort of violinist example you often hear. A virtuosic violinist is dying, and so they knock you out, they bring you to the virtuosic violinist's house, and now you are hooked up to I don't know why they used a violinist. Could have been a trombonist or something. There are two big problems with this particular argument. First, unless you were a victim of rape or incest, you do have a moral duty to the unborn child that you have created. And pregnancy is a foreseeable result of consensual sex, regardless of whether you used birth control. Those who refuse to connect sex with risk of pregnancy are either lying or stupid. You wouldn't have an obligation to keep that other human being tied onto your body if you were knocked out. But if you knocked the person out and then tied them onto your body, you probably would. Now let's talk about the rape and incest part of this bodily autonomy case. That would still be a problem. The problem is that abortion is not passive. It's not just a matter of cutting the cord. Abortion is a violent act. You're violently ending a person's life. Ethically, there is a difference between pulling the plug on a terminally ill person and stabbing that person in the chest repeatedly until they die. The same thing is true of abortion. And then there's a final problem too, which is that your child, regardless of how it was attached to you, is still your child. Okay, seventh argument that we are hearing now all the time: won't you be condemning women to dangerous, illegal abortions? So first off, there is no crime in America where we criminalize something, then we say, but we're deeply worried that if we criminalize this thing, people will still do it illegally and it will be dangerous for them. Right? We criminalize murder, and we're not like, well, you know what that's going to mean. People are going to have to really be sneaky about these murders. It's more dangerous. There's no crime that we deal with like this in criminal law. Kidnapping. We better not have a kidnapping law. If we've got a kidnapping law, we ban kidnapping. You know how rough it's going to be for those kidnappers? They're really going to have to go through the works. It's just going to be brutal. Okay, beyond that, the statistics that are generally quoted about the frequency of illegal abortion and death from illegal abortion are wildly inflated. They were in Roe versus Wade. Those were all lies. According to the Vital Statistics of the United States, Volume 2, Mortality, Part A, in 1960, there were a grand total of 1,579 pregnancy-related deaths in the United States. 289 were attributable to abortion, out of all the births in the United States. In 1968, that number was 133. According to the Centers for Disease Control Abortion Surveillance Annual Summary, in 1972, the year before Roe, there were a grand total of 24 deaths from legal abortions and 39 from illegal abortions, in a country of 150, 200 million people. Feminists like to argue that abortion is safer for mothers than pregnancy, that the process of pregnancy is likely to lead to more complications and health problems than abortion would. Okay, so having a child lengthens life expectancy. That doesn't give you the right to kidnap somebody else's kid. Now, if we're talking about a case where the mother's life is in actual danger, then the story becomes different. Every single one of the abortion laws that we've discussed has an exception to save the life of the mother. Virtually all pro-lifers agree on this particular point. Thank God, those circumstances are incredibly rare, and even in those circumstances, there is a difference between taking actions to save the life of the mother that result in the death of an unborn child or aborting a child for medical necessity. Okay, finally, we get to the last kind of point that gets thrown out there by the left a lot, and this is hypotheticals. They start just throwing out hypotheticals. They've run out of logical possibilities, and so they start using emotionally driven hypotheticals. So my favorite is one that was originally posed by Michael Sandel. He's a philosopher from Harvard, and you see this put a lot on Twitter, the stupidest place on earth. The thought exercise goes something like this. Let's say that you are in a burning building, and you can only save a crying 5-year-old child, or you can save a box of 1,000 embryos. Why you're in this building, why the kid's there, where his parents are, where the fire extinguisher is, apparently all, but this is the scenario. So, which do you save? And the answer, obviously, is you save the 5-year-old child. Well, voila, say the abortion advocates. This proves that embryos are not children and are thus not morally the same. This is a very silly argument. It's silly for 3 reasons. First, the hypothetical doesn't prove that embryos have no moral worth. It simply suggests that they may not have the same moral worth as a born child. But nobody having an abortion is being asked to make that choice. You're not being asked to choose between a born child and an embryo. You're just being asked not to kill the embryo. Every single pro-life bill, as I've mentioned, does have an exception to save the life of the mother. Second, we can easily create counter-hypotheticals where you would save the embryos and not the 5-year-old child. Let's say, for example, the famous space example, you're in space, the future of humanity relies on you. You got a 5-year-old kid, you got 1,000 human embryos. Which do you save? If you're trying to save the future of humanity, you save the 1,000 embryos because they have superior value. You'd be wrong not to save the embryos in that circumstance. Or let's say you can only save the box of embryos or a 96-year-old man with cancer. You could easily make the case that we ought to save the box of embryos. That does not mean the 96-year-old man with cancer has no human value or that the 5-year-old doesn't have human value. Finally, these sorts of false choices are just that. They are false choices. If I had to choose between saving a 5-year-old kid and saving a 9-year-old man, I would save the 5-year-old kid, just based on life expectancy alone. That doesn't mean that the 5-year-old is quote-unquote worth more. It doesn't mean that the 9-year-old is worth nothing. In abortion, finally, as always, you are not choosing between objects in virtually all cases. You need to establish, if you are a pro-choice person, that this thing does not have value in and of itself. Not it has comparative value lesser than something else, that it has no value in and of itself. So, here's the deal. We don't have to rely, I've not a single time in the speech, or any time generally when I talk about abortion, relied on the Bible. So when Chris Cuomo, as I say, the dumber of the two blocks of wood known as the Cuomo brothers, when Chris Cuomo says that abortion, that pro-life people are driven by faith and feelings, throughout the speech I have not mentioned God one time, I've not mentioned the Bible one time, even though I'm a big Bible believer and a big God believer. It's why I wear a funny hat all the time. But the fact is this, human life is valuable because we are indeed created in the image of God, every single one of us. That image began its formation the moment your dad's sperm met your mother's egg. Each of us is unique. Each of us is a truly unique individual with special human value. You know, it's funny, when we discuss abortion, because it's such a fraught topic, we tend to forget that each one of us is special because of the fact that we were each created from this single sperm and a single egg at a single moment. If we'd been conceived at a different moment, we wouldn't be us. You wouldn't be you. None of us would. Your presence here is an event etched in time, beginning with the love of a man for a woman, of a mother for a child, God for his creation. The Zohar, which is a mystical Jewish text, states, quote, "A person who kills the fetus in his wife's womb desecrates that which was built by the Holy One and his craftsmanship." We are the creators, not the destroyers. We must be a country that creates and stops the destruction. Let us always continue the fight. Thanks so much.